We have 7 esteemed speakers from around the world for this roundtable session. I'd like to thank the Urban Economy Forum for providing me with this wonderful opportunity to moderate this session. And so before I head on to the speakers list, I'd like to remind you all that each speaker gets about 5 to 7 minutes to speak. And since we only have about an hour, so we have to make use of the time wisely. And towards the end, we can have a panel discussion or more like a clarifications, suggestions, anything can be answered. So the topic, as Alex mentioned, for our roundtable conference is community-based financing models and tools. And the theme is inclusive urban finance. A quick intro on the topic. See, this topic, it's a thriving topic, and it creates a thriving environment within the community and community members, the organizations, institutes. And because having a community-based finance model, that works in the community, that is a key to sustainability. And that involves an in-depth, hands-on research and creating initiatives or programs that supports local businesses. So now I'd like to, introduce the speakers and get right into the speakers list. So the first speaker has been recognized for wearing multiple hats here in Regent Park since 2016 and has played a key role in supporting the development of a strong community, being a business owner, and most importantly, she specializes in building community wealth infrastructure. She is the Director of Projects and Partnership with the Center of Social Innovation. I'd like to welcome the lovely Denise, everyone.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for having me. Thank you so much, Pavitra, for that wonderful introduction. A specialist in community wealth building. I think we've been building community wealth here in Regent Park specifically over the last 5 years, and really excited about what's happening on the ground here. I think you have some slides up. I'm just going to trust that they're up on the screen. The first thing I want to start with is, what is community wealth? I mean, we talk about community economic development. We've talked about community economic development for a super long time, and this is sort of maybe the next phase. And the next phase is a sort of more integrated model. There's sort of 3 key pieces of community wealth. The first thing is to harmonize this idea of economic development and human development, but they don't actually exist in separate spheres. They can be harmonized all together, and that we have to look at sort of a holistic model for community wealth building, or for building sort of sustainability in communities, and that's that marriage of the 2 things. And that community wealth is meant to benefit communities. It is built and designed to benefit communities, particularly those communities of equity deserving groups, which is why Regent Park is the place that we chose to start this work and to really test this model of community economic development. And the third major thing is that we need to shift the system. The system, as we know, many of our systems are challenged and experiencing lots of stress in the current world, and that community wealth building is meant to shift the system, and it's meant to shift the system for positive economic and human impact on a long-term scale. I think whoever's got the key to the slides, if you could just switch to the next one, that would be super lovely. Thank you so much. On this slide, you see sort of a diagram. The diagram, the sort of Venn diagram, is that there are multiple levels in community. There's individuals, there's organizations, and there's systems, and they're all working together in this model. It really is the concept of this model of community economic development is to integrate all of the pieces. So everything from the residents, like in Regent Park, we work with residents, and we also work with the city and with the developers, and we leverage all of the systems to bring together a system that's integrated for everybody's benefit. So something like making sure that there's financial tools to support the entrepreneurs that are in the community, to create a local business system that then allows residents to spend their money in the community, and the whole system complements each other. The slide, gentlemen, please, if you would just click to the next one, that would be super helpful. And so aside from that Venn diagram here on this map, you see what a community would look like. Some of you might have heard the term circular economy, this idea that sort of everything revolves around the local systems. You have, like I said, residents participating in the system in terms of both starting their own businesses, social enterprises, and enterprises that are locally developed, again, particularly equity-seeking groups or equity-deserving groups, and also local residents supporting those businesses so that money gets reinvested into their own community. And you can see from this diagram how this sort of whole system all works together. It's a really lovely way that institutions create jobs, jobs create economic prosperity, those resources get reinvested into the community, and the whole system sort of feeds back into itself to create a sustainable model. We worked recently on a community wealth sustainability model for Regent Park, and from that we have 5 recommendations that I would love to share with you. I mean, these recommendations would be sort of the recommendations that we might make for any community to develop community wealth. And those 5 recommendations are, first of all, to develop a coordinated strategy, so to integrate all of the stakeholders in a community to ensure that everybody is at the table, everybody has a voice, and everybody's working together on this strategy, because again, it is really an integrated system and requires all voices. The second recommendation to building a community wealth strategy is to develop a learning and education strategy so that everybody is on the same page. Residents, organizations, and stakeholders all have an understanding of what is involved and what the pieces are of community wealth building. The third system is to start to build the neighborhood capacity, so offer opportunities for the neighborhood to develop capacity to take over their own assets, for instance, and we're doing that with the CSI Community Living Room at the Daniel Spectrum Building currently, where we're inviting residents to take agency over an asset that's in their own community. So booking it and using it and programming for it, and building that capacity of management and upper level management of things in their own community. The fourth is to actually create a business incubator, both a social business incubator and a sort of locally developed business incubator, so that folks in the community have the tools and the resources to build their own businesses that would support this this circular economic system. And the fifth thing is to actually create an investment platform for the community. And this is a sort of two-armed investment platform. On the one hand, you're unlocking resources for the Regent Park community or for the community that you're working with. Currently in Regent Park, CSI has unlocked over $700,000 in the last year and a half for resident-led initiatives in the community, everything from soccer teams to markets to women's programs. So that's one side is actually unlocking the resources for local communities, for local community residents to either start their own businesses or to start initiatives. And the other side of the arm is to actually create investment tools. We refer to something called the community dividend, and that's long-term sustainable funding that can be invested back into the community and have a platform that actually holds that money and helps to manage it into the community. That's a super quick overview on community wealth, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody more about it, but I will pass it along because I know we've got a short timeline.
Denise, thank you so much for summing up, about like such a huge topic in like 5 minutes. Hats off to you. So I'd like to introduce the next speaker. Probably the speaker is virtual. So the speaker is recognized, the second speaker is recognized as a recipient of distinction awards, has written a number of books, and wears multiple hats towards housing project, research, networks, and she specializes in social cultural aspects of community building and planning. She was appointed to the Board of Commissioners of Housing Management and is a founding director of the Housing Research Collaborative with the University of British Columbia. I'd like to welcome Penny Burstein, everyone.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me? I assume you can. Yes, well, that was a really good introduction into what I've been thinking about in terms of this panel. one of the things that I think has become very noticeable since the financial crisis of 2008, and which was really exacerbated in COVID, is that we need new models, and our financial institutions are really not serving our needs right now. And one of the things I noticed by even just in this conference is that there are a few financial people representing financial institutions, but there really needs to be a lot more, because they're the ones who are driving, driving our economy right now. What we really need to be doing and encouraging is more community-based initiatives like what Denise is talking about. I happen to, I actually forgot that I actually live in the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I forgot to mention that, which is in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. We've been fortunate to have some very innovative financial, at least one very innovative financial institution that has been able to really be a support and the go-to place for any kind of innovation in the economy, in housing developments, in all of these things, and that's Vancity, which is the largest credit union in Canada right now, and I noticed is one of the sponsors of this forum. Also in Quebec, there's the Desjardins group, Caisse Populaire, which is Caisse Populaire, very similar to credit unions. These are member-driven organizations, so that you actually are controlling your own financial destiny through the decisions. There's a board of directors who set policy, but the intention is to be going back into the community. And that's what Denise is really, I really appreciate the model that you developed. This is what we actually need to be doing. We need to be developing models that will allow for communities to actually nurture and grow, and that these and in the locales and in the locales where they can be identifying their own needs. Right now, but the problem right now, as we know, is that there is very large global forces. People today have talked about financialization of housing, the globalization of capital, all of these things. What we need is the scale. So we need a large enough scale that is both local and national and even global. I do believe that we do have that capacity. I mean, to be developing really innovative community-based mechanisms and institutions that could be really profoundly changing the way that we make decisions right now. Because too many of our decisions really are left to people that and institutions that we really have no say in. So I really hope that in this at this Urban Economic Forum, and I understand there's going to be a position paper coming out, I really hope that one of the things that comes out of this is that we have to actually be really starting really important dialogues with financial institutions. And I was at a meeting where CMHC was saying that they needed to start doing that. I haven't heard much about what's going on around that, but I hope that they're doing that. We need to be talking to these financial institutions, to making them accountable to the decisions that they are making that are beyond our purview. So I just want to end it at that. I hope that something will come of this the World Economic Forum, where we actually do recognize the importance of communities and how we can actually innovate within communities. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Penny. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And yes, financial institutions, having support from them to encourage community initiatives, that makes a lot of difference. And yeah, that'll be more of a positive impact. So now I'd like to introduce the third speaker. Yeah, now I'd like to introduce a third speaker. The third speaker is a resident, a community advocate, a champion, an entrepreneur here in Regent Park, Canada. And he is the executive director of Vision of Tomorrow, a non-profit organization that works with projects and programs that bring a better tomorrow here in Regent Park community. He is recognized for his work in developing a community app called Hello Neighbor, that helps connect residents. And I'd like to invite the lovely one and only Ibrahim Hafra.
Thank you very much. I want to start with who is Vision of Tomorrow. Vision of Tomorrow is a young organization, and right now, because of the leadership of local people in the community like myself, the idea, there is a philosophy behind it, and the philosophy starts, I always like to repeat this, so for those of you who have heard it, I do apologize. And that philosophy starts with 3 B's. Believe change is possible. So personally, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of mindset changing. That change can really happen in this world or in your community because of the many obstacles people face. And this belief has to happen internally. It has to happen with others who are going through similar mindsets. And once that belief happens, then the journey of change can really begin. Until then, communities are stuck where they are. You won't believe how many conversations that happen locally of people convincing each other something is possible. Because of the tremendous struggle and challenge ahead of people, such a journey can really take some time. So one of the things that we really want to echo out there is believe that change is possible. And the next B is begin. I myself have really criticized myself for saying to myself, maybe I'm not capable of this. Maybe I don't have enough knowledge in this topic. Maybe I'm not ready. But it has to begin somewhere, and it should begin with you. Change should always come from those who really feel the need to make it happen. So my advice to others and everywhere is that when you believe something that is tremendous, that is powerful to your community, begin where you're at. And the last B is build. And this is where the strength of the community and the strength of the world comes in contact. Collaboration is really a must, where you need to collaborate because all of the knowledge and expertise is not just sitting with one person. Even though you began, you might not have the capacity yet, but others who you partner up with have that strength, have that knowledge, have those tools. And in this community, there are many stories that you can hear of how building has actually shaped the future of this neighborhood. And one of them I'll be sharing with you is the revitalization of this community. And if you do come to the tour later on, and we can talk about in detail what those look like, but I will just gonna share with you the social development plan. So the social development plan is a plan that was put together by a lot of folks involving government, organizations, and residents. This was a plan that talked about how will this community live after we have developed, after we have our beautiful buildings, our beautiful facilities. How do we continue to live together? Is there a plan that looks into community building? And there's many experts and many folks that were passionate about, and a plan came to be. And I'm gonna connect this plan into resources that are needed to make these visions true. Because any plan without resources is a plan that is just sitting there. So one of the real champions of this community, my brother, he could not be here with me today, but I want to showcase his talent and his abilities and how he himself and with others locally came together and said, how do we put this plan? How do we create the finances is needed? So with the community and people you see here today, they have championed them. They went to City Hall, talked to our local mayor, talked to our councillor, and really championed that this plan requires some financing. And we need this money in order for the community to do well. And through advocacy, which I want to highlight to the communities around the world, that change cannot happen without you. You need to advocate for these changes, and you cannot wait. And a great teacher of mine who's not here, but I always like to claim I'm one of his students, is Gandhi. He believed in something called Satyagraha, holding to truth. And this truth is that every one of us deserve to be part of the table, deserve to be part of the decision making, and we need to advocate for ourselves in order to be in those tables. So that's what the community did through the social development plan. We championed it, and finally, through the mayor and through his staff, they recognized that this requires funding, ideas required resources, and the community was granted $4 million for 4 years. Each year, $500,000 to come up with initiatives and ideas to make this community a better place. And just one of the things that Pavitra mentioned is that the need for a connective community. And the community got to working with many of the projects that you will find out later on, and one of them being a community app called Hello Neighbor. And this app centralizes the communication locally in the community, that you're able to share information, you're able to share what is going on, and that could not have happened without the last B that I mentioned, building with others. The last thing that I wanted to say, and to emphasize the point that I'm trying to make to the world, is that there's this story where a person came to talk to, it's a fairy tale, I'm gonna make it quick. The fairy tale is this person came to talk to this mythical creature that a lot of the community go to, and they tell them their problems and their issues. And it was a small tree. I might be forgetting the story, but the principle is that after the tree heard all of the issues, the tree replied back and said, I can't do nothing about what you want. I can't do nothing about what you need, but I need you to show me some seed. You need to put water into this tree. You need to put your energy. You need to put your effort, for the possibility of a better tomorrow relies on efforts of today that comes from those people that are local. So my message to you and the world is, change lies with all of you and holding people accountable. And there are people who are ready to help, who are ready to partner up, but it cannot be championed alone. Thank you.
Lovely, Ibrahim, lovely. I like your motto of believe, begin, and build. And having a collaborative approach, definitely impacts the growth of any initiative, any program, any positive change in community, or even to oneself. Yeah, so that's really empowering. And I'd like to invite the next speaker. So the next speaker is a high-profile politician and represents the people of Sri Lanka, is a recipient of several awards, a well-knowledgeable and experienced youth leader, and recognized for being a creative strategist and an international youth rights advocate. He is the founder of the South Asia Regional Youth Network and co-chaired the World Conference on Youth in 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite the Additional Director General, Department of Government Information of Sri Lanka, Melinda Rajapaksa. So sorry about it. Due to some technical difficulties, I'll be moving on to the next speaker. So the next speaker is also a resident, a champion, a community advocate, and a campaign master here in Regent Park. He has served as a president of the Toronto Environmental Alliance and is the founding member of TTC Riders. He has been currently elected as the resident co-chair of 2 working groups towards Regent Park Social Development Plan and as a board member with the Regent Park Neighborhood Association. The community leader of Ward 13, Toronto, Walid Kogali, everyone.
Thank you, Pavitra, and thank you everyone for being here in person. It's really nice doing an in-person discussion. And I know our topic, was discussed earlier. We talked a lot about the literature, policy, but I want to switch things up. So I'm gonna ask my friend to maybe showcase the first it's a video so our virtual audience can watch it. I'm gonna provide you folks some context before we show that video. My understanding of community development, and most importantly, how to utilize finance, local finance in that development, is not just through the social development plan, but through what I've learned through grassroots organizations in our community. And this video showcases a program, one of our first programs in the neighborhood. This was in the midst of the pandemic. Everything was shut down in our community, and residents came together. Residents came together to make sure that folks in our community had access to food. Food, no matter what your background was, no matter what the demographic was, we made sure you had access to food. So let's just quickly show that video.
Give me 45 seconds.
45 seconds, okay. So for 45 seconds, I'm gonna tell you that after this video, we're gonna showcase an infographic. And this infographic was developed by a youth. I'm gonna talk about a lot about capacity building in my short remarks. But that infographic will be an aid to demonstrate the impact, the local impact, and this is within a 1-month period. So this was during the holy month of Ramadan, which a lot of folks in our community adhere to. And it was also in the midst of a pandemic. I just want to remind Alex to share the audio. When you're sharing the screen share audio, always forget about that.
Dedicated to make sure that members of our community
iftar meals for the most needy of the mosque.
Okay, so that was a short, I guess, a presentation of the video. I'll make sure that the link is shared with folks who register so they can watch it. But the video just illustrated community coming together, folks donating to a cause that they deeply cared about, which was food insecurity. It was also an opportunity for youth, for folks to actually connect with their community by making sure that they just not deliver meals, but also provide support, right? A lot of folks in the pandemic were impacted by being forced to stay home. A lot of folks who basically were forced to go work had to go to work and come straight home. Everything was shut down. They did not have that social contact. The other learning from that video, and I'm gonna ask my friends to share the infographic if they can, just show the infographic, was the impact of the community coming together, right? So through this project, if you look at the economic impact, the direct economic impact, it's about $78,000 in 1 month. And I just wanna point to the fact that we were able to deliver over 10,500 meals in a span of 30 days. Imagine that, right? And not only that, we made sure that folks were supported by access to good food boxes, to supplement their diet, fruits, groceries, stuff that was inaccessible during the pandemic. We partnered with Food Share Toronto, we partnered with local mosques, we partnered with agencies, we partnered with grassroots organizations, and we partnered with residents, folks just like you, folks who just cared enough to not just donate, but also volunteer their time. We engaged with hundreds of volunteers that helped make sure that those meals were delivered, helped prepare the meals, in fact, and some of them wanted to continue this work after that 1 month period. We also told our story. We engaged a lot over social media. This is the new norm now, right? In the midst of this pandemic, a lot of us were connecting with each other over social media. I was one of the administrators of Caremongering Toronto, and Caremongering TO actually inspired other similar movements around the world, and was all done virtually. We had tens of thousands of residents of Toronto join that Facebook group virtually, but the impact has not been studied today, right? Folks were starting projects through that group, and this is just an example of what happened in Regent Park. We continued this work through the mutual aid project, which is basically, we made sure that there were pods, neighborhood pods, residents were able to engage with each other. We made sure that organizations and agencies were able to support residents, but supporting residents means empowering residents, right? So that's one important piece. The one thing that I wanted to end off on when we're talking about what's happening in Regent Park, and this is just an example of what is possible, is we're in the midst of what our elected officials earlier talked about was revitalization or gentrification. Earlier, we heard from elected representatives and other policymakers talk about the impact of austerity, right? We feel that directly on the ground, right? When those programs are canceled, when those investments are not happening, it's the residents, it's the folks living in this community that feel it the most. And what we're doing right now is we're actually an active, very active community. Regent Park has a long tradition of being at the forefront of advocacy work across the city. And one of the things we're doing right now is we're pushing for not just community benefits, which many of you might know of, but accountability and transparency in the way those community benefits are delivered. Making sure that the residents of Regent Park, making sure that the community is at the forefront of the co-development, co-design, and the co-implementation of a community benefits plan. And what we also want to do is we want to make sure that governments, federal, provincial, and municipal governments are partners in this work, because we cannot solve decades of austerity without the right solutions. And those solutions are with the community. And I want to end off my remarks by just speaking to something important that the Regent Park Neighborhood Association always advocates. I'm going to ask my friends to look at that panel in the room, if you folks don't mind. Do you see the panel just beside you? Rabia? Rabia, do you mind reading out the last slogan in the bottom? What does it say? Exactly. It's about belonging. And we are right now in the midst of that biggest, I wouldn't call it a project, but biggest investment in community, because we need to relate it to the people that are impacted. So thank you so much for hearing my remarks, and looking forward to our next speaker from Sri Lanka. Thank you, Pavitra.
Thank you, Wally. Thank you for sharing your experience. And yeah, it really depends on like each community, because every community has a unique way of, the hands-on like research experience and curating initiatives and programs. So yeah, so that way is doing a research and initiating a project that serves that community. That way it helps building a finance model that will be successful. So now I have the final speaker, and she is a well-renowned famous artist, a mother, a feminist, a humanist, and an adventurer. She specializes in surreal portraits of famous people and conveys stories with her canvas. She is recognized for developing educational programs for young artists and has co-founded Arts Help, which drives social change, and she has received an UN Habitat Award for her work. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite the one and only Sophie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sophie Brusseau. I am an artist and I've dedicated the past years of my life to support the SDGs through various art initiatives. So I've worked with a few institutions, as you mentioned. I've worked with educational institutions. I've worked with the UN directly. I've worked with the Vatican. And every time we've tried to reconnect the SDGs and try to make people interested in what would be a direct consequence to their lives, being better. And we found out that at the heart of every solid community, there is art. Art tells a human story, and it makes other people connect to one another through feeling and empathy, something our capitalist way of life has, forgotten a little bit. Art acts as a cement between community members, and it can help reopen the dialogue between governing entities and the local people, which is the only way to achieve long-lasting, sustainable development and change. We want people to feel like they're part of a community, like they're part of certain initiatives. And we found that the moment that people engaged within the community through the lens of art, there usually was a feeling of belonging and a feeling of responsibility. Art is an act of shared communication that is in a small way saying, I make the world, I don't simply inherit it. So I'll give you an example of this French photographer and activist, JR. He did a campaign called Women Are Heroes in some of the riskiest war zones in the world, such as the favelas of Rio or even Gaza Strip. And he managed to do things even journalists were not able to do. He talked to the people living there. He did an exhibition with the photographs of the inhabitants, which he pasted on their roofs, as we can see in Kibera and Nairobi. Socially and politically engaged art is growing. It's impossible to qualify and quantify the effect art has on people because it works in mysterious, latent, and subtle ways, unfortunately. That's why it's so hard to convince politicians of arts funding, because it allows for something that cannot be defined. Its value, its importance, its merits, and its significance cannot be judged by popular consensus, nor numbers alone. It's a subtle power that will change the world one perception at a time. It changes the world, not on macro, but on a micro level. Art is the genesis of sustainable change. And I wanted to add also that I think this is really what will cement people when everybody, all the speakers before were very eloquently speaking about having everybody sitting at the table. I think just the fact that there is, it's usually the case, only one artist in a talk about finances, I think it's already a way of showing that, there is change happening. Now everybody wants to be involved. And I think just like everybody said before, this is how we're going to make it happen, how we're going to shape the future that we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I totally agree. And not just me, everyone would agree. Art speaks for itself, and conveying message through art is more impactful. Anything, like infographic, picture, that has much more impact than words. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So now I'd like to open the floor for any questions, comments, or clarifications that you all would like to, have with our speakers here and some speakers virtual. I'd like to open the floor now. Yeah, it's open. Yeah, any questions or comments, even though the virtual is also fine. I believe I have a question with the profile. It says Regent Park.
Oh, yeah, that's me. It's Gail, resident of Regent Park. So I'm just for the panel, based on what you know of Regent Park, what is a model that you would recommend for this community that you believe can work, just based on what you know or have heard today about this community? What is one wealth building model that you think, could work for this community?
Thank you, Gail. That's Gail from Regent Park. She's one of the Economic and Entrepreneur Development Working Group co-chair. So I'd like to open the, who would like to, I'd like to.
Thanks so much, Gail. I think that that the community wealth model is something that we have been working on for the last few years, as I mentioned, and I think that it actually has a long-term practical implications for this community. Gail and I this summer worked on a moonlight market for local female identified entrepreneurs as a way to sort of start to build the capacity of residents, like I said in the third recommendation for this community, and it sort of starts small, but with these small little actions of unlocking money and supporting local social entrepreneurs and local entrepreneurs and bringing folks to the table and stakeholders to the table, I think that it is a very practical model that we could implement that has a long-term sustainability impact on communities, Regent Park specifically, but on communities like Regent Park.
I just want to add that it's crucial that no matter what model you have, it's all about implementation. What does the community have to hold those accountable for change, accountable, right? So we talk a lot about community benefits, or community benefit agreements as a tool, but what's also crucial to also distinguish is when it comes to community access to assets. One of the basic ones is home ownership, right? We've all studied this. If you cannot address the root causes of poverty if folks are not housed in our city. And it's shameful that we live in a city where many residents are forced to live in our parks, on encampments, right? And we can't ignore that. And community wealth, in my opinion, has to be a strategy that is specific and intentional, right? And the accountability tools are crucial in that model. Thank you.
The one thing I want to say is that if we look at around the world, if a resident or somebody sees a problem in their community, what tools is available to them? First, I think they need to recognize that this problem is not just faced by themselves, that it affects their neighbors. And the most powerful change comes from, in my opinion, individuals who care and come together with their neighbors. And it starts with their own giving back. So the time that they meet, the time that they're planning about the issues, those are tremendous resources that sometimes we don't think of. People coming together is, I think, one of the best resources that is available. We should not underestimate that. And second, just looking at the neighborhood, there are 3 grants available to residents and grassroots in this neighborhood. There was a time when, in order to get funding, you had to be an organization. You had to be a registered organization financially 3 to 4 years. Now the barriers to receiving financial support to people who want to make change is getting reduced. And that is to the help of people who recognize that. Right now, one of the fundings we have, I mentioned, is the Social Development Plan. Another one is through the organization United Way. There is funding available for projects and ideas. And the last one that I am really proud of is something called the Legacy Fund. This is a fund that is available to local people and is rooted into the history of advocacy in this neighborhood. And that story, there's more details to it. I'll be sharing it in the tour. But providing aid and finances to local people who care about it, I think, is one of the biggest ways for change to really be impacted fast. Thank you.
So I don't know as much about Regent Park as the paddlers in Toronto. But one model that came to mind when I was seeing Denise's slide deck was community development corporations in the US that have been very, very successful in really doing what building a local economy, addressing, building housing, and doing all the social development work that needs to be done in terms of supporting activities for children and all of these things. So they seem to be quite successful. I mean, not all of them, but that's something that I think might be looked at. And the other thing is, I know in another panel, they didn't really mention community land trusts. I mean, community land trust is really critical to address affordability right now. And we need to and I know Toronto is actually one of the leaders right now in community land trusts. So I think that, combining a kind of model that Denise is talking about, the kind of community development corporation model with a plan on how land can be, can be provided in perpetuity to provide affordability, I think is critical. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And are there any questions or comments, anything at all, like in person, virtual? I see none. Oh yes, yeah, there is one person.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation on community work and community development. I was just wondering, community is not a homogeneous concept. It consists of age, class, and diverse groups. So when you talk about community, how do you create consensus on a specific program or a project? There should be dialogue, there should be conflict resolution necessary, and this is something, an exercise that would really build sort of a resilience in community by building consensus in a diverse situation. At the same time, diversity also is an asset. So how do you know, how do you sort of, because you always say community as a wonderful thing, but it's not a homogeneous thing anyway, So how do you sort of, in Regent Park, you succeeded in implementing different projects in these groups? Thank you.
Excellent question. We love to talk about social cohesion and inclusion. Social development plan, the one that Ibrahim and a lot of us refer to, and by the way, should be a model for other communities around the city. My work in Moss Park is a push for social development plan in Moss Park. But your question saying, how do we make it possible for residents to feel they're part of the community? And there's that diversity that you referenced. And I think we've had a lot of learning through our social development plan, specifically making decisions through consensus. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time, a lot of meetings, but it's building buy-in for collective action and also agency for people to bring a different perspective to the table and get everyone to do what's in the best interest of the community. So that's been a very important premise and backdrop to this work. The second thing is accessibility. We're now making our meetings very accessible, making sure that we don't have meetings that conflict with religious or other needs, right? Because we want everyone at the table. We can't say that everyone's at the table when we have meetings that, sometimes people can't make it because they have other important priorities. So we make sure that it's not about accommodation, it's about accessibility, true accessibility, right? And I think the other piece is doing the work together. One of the most memorable events I've done this year was was it last month or 2 months ago, in August? In fact, with amazing support of an organizing committee through the community building working group. I want to give a shout out to two of our co-chairs, Joel Hassan, welcome Joel, and Rabia, who's also another co-chair. But what I loved about that experience was it got everyone to come together to do an event that celebrated our diversity, right? Where we made sure that we had programming for our youth, kids, for bingo for our seniors, we had inflatables, we had a space for members of our communities to talk to each other, to give each other a hug, to connect with each other. And sometimes we forget that those relationship building spaces and opportunities are vital. They're vital to community building. How can I trust my neighbor if we haven't had a chance to share what challenges we have in common or what vision we share, for the future, right? So, and I think it's crucial for us to remember that. So that's my sort of quick response, is that it's work in progress, but it's built on a strong foundation.
Well said, Waleed. And yes, I also like to add a few points on that. Here in Regent Park, as Waleed mentioned, the main goal of the social development plan is social cohesion and inclusion. And they have planned it in such a way that there is a representative from each group, as in from a market resident and from a TCHC resident, and also an agency or an organization. So this way, all the ideas are accounted for, and that's how they work cohesively. So that, as he mentioned, it's more like building from ground up. So it's more of an collaborative approach towards community. And any other questions? Any other comments? Virtual or you're in person? Oh, yeah, we have one question.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, Ali. It's good to see you here. It's just like it have been proven like women usually have the triple role of productive, reproductive, and community engagement, which make gender as a main aspect when you're looking at community. So looking at community as homogeneous group again, without giving any attention to their gender differences, usually turns out that women step back and it's the men who takes the lead. And it's suppressing the needs, bringing their voices, and then they become the silent ones. And end of the day, they are the one to bear the consequence of the negative impacts if something went wrong. That way of looking at community as homogeneous group and looking at housing and things like at gender neutral usually leads to women needs and aspiration being sidelined. So how did you look at this gender issue, power relationship, with all the intersectionality of age, race, ethnicity, especially now our Canadian cities are receiving a lot of immigrants who are also have their, sociocultural biases against or marginalities or whatever you can call it. So how you can make it like inclusive cities for people who are indigenous people, immigrants, and also local people based on gender intersectionalities. Thank you.
So thank you for your question. I would like to say is always when it comes to advocacy and being inclusive, the group that you were speaking of really needs to be the champion of such causes. And that always it's good to have people who understand what is going on and who welcome them to the space. But sometimes if people actually welcomed people, this problem would not exist. I think advocacy has to be from my point of view, led, and sometimes if you're not welcome at the table, you create your own table. You sit with other people who have similar minds, and you advocate, and you try to achieve what you are trying to do. And sometimes that's not easy, and sometimes in this community, what I have seen through understanding the legacy of this neighborhood, some of our local moms are actually championed so many advocacy stories in this neighborhood that they themselves recognize that there's an issue, and they are the leads that have taken initiatives. And when you look into Regent Park and the different groups, majority of the people that you see are our moms. They are sitting day in, day out, saying this is what's needed and how do we do it better. This might be different with other communities, but I really want to put the advocacy back on individuals. For them to see the change they want, they need to be the one who pushes the idea, gets their neighbors involved, and not take no for an answer, because the no's and the excuses are ready. There's always a no in front of you. And getting used to that no is okay, but not giving up. That's what I'll say.
Thank you, Ibrahim. One final comment.
Thanks so much, and what a really great question that you asked. I think I sort of track these things. Being a woman in this community, there are quite a few voices. As Ibrahim has said, we have a lot of women who are involved in this community, and in this community, there's a lovely. As Ibrahim referred to, there's this sort of idea that you can do whatever you want. And if there's something that you feel compelled to, we have over 120 grassroots organizations that operate in this community, pushing things forward from, Mothers of Peace to access to recreation, all those kinds of things. But I think that that's great, and those are really phenomenal and fabulous things that are happening. But I think maybe what you're getting at is that sometimes there's this subversive or this sort of undercurrent where at tables women's voices are not necessarily prioritized, or women are often sort of frustrated by things that happen that don't necessarily get a lot of space, that don't necessarily get a lot of time or airtime, and sometimes their voices are pushed to the side. And there is this concept, or this sort of what's the word, pathway, where people just get frustrated and they sort of step away, and they maybe don't necessarily have the space to say why they stepped away, and they'll say things like that, family, or it's too busy, or I've got, those kinds of things. And if you're paying attention, you can watch these things happen. One of the things that I've noticed, particularly in this community, is a lot of, and this is not a knock, this is just a noticing, a lot of what I see is that this community, so much of it is grassroots organized, which is phenomenal, and it speaks to a lot of the power and a lot of the energy in this community. And what I see in this community and other communities that we work with is sometimes process can help you get there. Sometimes at the very beginning, when you're setting up a neighborhood table, or when you're setting up a neighborhood model or a neighborhood system, that if you can account for these kinds of things, we all think that everything's going to be hunky-dory and we're all going to get along when we start these things. We're like, it's going to be great and everything's going to be perfect and we're going to be best friends forever. And we don't actually build in those conflict resolution models and the conflict resolution processes and the processes to keep us safe when things go wrong. I mean, if we're all fine, we don't actually need the processes. But it's when things go wrong that we actually need the processes for. And if things are getting started, if a neighborhood table or if a revitalization process or those kinds of things, if you're getting started in building these models, I would highly, highly encourage you to develop these processes either with professionals, conflict resolution professionals, and those kinds of things, so that you have the processes to fall back on when things go wrong. It's, a family therapist or a marriage counselor will say to you, everybody comes to me when things are bad, and then I have so much work to do to fix it. But if you come to me when things are good, and we develop a process that when things start to go wrong, we actually have something to fall back on, that's actually a way to keep people safe, and it's a way to make sure that people's voices are heard, and that we don't have this system where people are sort of falling back, or they're feeling like they need to fall back because they're not feeling like they have space in the system. And so again, there's sort of this thing that's out front and public, that there is this culture in Regent Park that everybody is welcome and everybody can be involved. And then there is this issue that happens at every table, and for a lot of marginalized voices, particularly women, where they're silenced or they're feeling like they have to step away because they're just not being heard. And again, I think that the answer to that, particularly if you're starting fresh, the answer to that is really good process.
I just want to add, apart from conflict resolution, and Denise, I think, put it so well, like if you're building a system, it needs to be incorporated, is you need to also have direct interventions, right? As co-chair of community building, I'm so glad you asked that question, my friend, so glad, is, we've been investing in actually women empowerment, or folks who are historically disfranchised, right? And it's making sure that that support continues to exist. We had a women's group in Regent Park that got together, that's doing some phenomenal, great work, right? But they're also encouraged to be part of the full working groups of the SDP, right? So they could be leaders, they could be co-chairs, right? So it's about interventions directly, right? So thank you for that amazing question.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you, Wally, for sharing your thoughts. And yeah, that was a lovely question. So I'd like to sum up this session, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to thank all the speakers for sharing their thoughts, their experience with community finance models and tools. That matters a lot for community building within a community. And it's mostly like harmonizing social, economic, and human development, more of a collaborative approach, and that will be much more successful. I thank UEF again for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you all.